They ordered her off the gun deck. Could one woman's defiance rewrite history? No rank, no clearance, no place in this battle. She didn't argue. She just glanced at the sky. Seconds later, 2 enemy jets broke the clouds. Chaos. Screams. The crew scattered. But she moved straight to the cannon. 6 seconds later, both jets were falling. And the admiral, he didn't speak, just stared at her, then whispered a name no one had heard in years. The wind tore across the deck of the USS Valor like it was trying to peel the skin from their bones. Salt spray slapped faces. Boots slipped on slick steel. And the growl of engines below never ceased. Everyone was shouting, coordinating the live fire drill, herding new recruits, resetting cables that hadn't been secured right. And in the middle of it all stood her, drenched in sweat and ocean mist, sleeves rolled, hair tied back in a tight coil. She wasn't on the roster. She wasn't even in uniform. Just standard contractor coveralls, faded gray, with her last name barely visible across the chest. Wyatt. No one paid her any attention until she moved near the aft gun turret. You off the deck now. The voice came from a lieutenant who didn't even look up from his clipboard. He didn't ask what she was doing, didn't care. She looked at him calmly, nodded once, and turned away without a word. As she walked back toward the equipment crates, she passed 3 gunners in training, barely 20, fumbling through a weapon maintenance checklist. One of them muttered, another civvy trying to feel important, and laughed. She didn't flinch, just leaned down, picked up a fallen hydraulic coupler, set it back where it belonged, and moved on. Most people thought she was part of the logistics contract team, repairing flight deck servos, checking turret rotation motors, fixing things no one noticed unless they broke. She never corrected them. She never said a word about who she was. Not even when the new deck chief, Master Chief Holbrook, looked right at her that morning and barked, "You shouldn't even be up here. This is a live drill." She simply pointed toward a loose power conduit under the turret mount and replied, "That line's about to fry half your system." Holbrook blinked. 10 minutes later, the chief electrician confirmed it. No apology followed. No one knew her first name. No one cared. She worked twice as fast as the others, took the worst assignments, never asked for breaks, and kept a small green duffel stashed under a sealed crate with a red tag. An odd choice given that no one ever saw her open it. She was invisible and she preferred it that way until the alarm sounded. It began with a single alert, a proximity flag from the Eastern Radar Array. At first, it was dismissed as a calibration error. Then the second contact appeared, then a third. Fast, low, breaking protocol routes unidentified. Suddenly, everything changed. Voices escalated. Orders shouted, hatches sealed. The USS Valor was no longer in training mode. Wyatt didn't move. While others scrambled toward control stations, shouting over each other and faking calm, she stood completely still beside the tied-down tarp near the aft turret. Her eyes locked onto the sky far beyond the visible range of most. The kind of look only someone trained to see patterns in chaos would have. It was a stare that had measured dozens of engagements, hundreds of threat vectors, and memorized more flight silhouettes than the average pilot had seen in simulators. One of the rookies, still carrying a tool belt, bumped into her and barked, "Get below, civilian. It's not safe up here." She didn't even blink. A second later, 2 F-14s screamed overhead, "Not friendly." The sound alone made the newer sailors drop to an E. The Valor CIWS hadn't even spun up yet. Someone had frozen in fire control. Someone else was still unlocking targeting protocols. Panic spread like oil on water. Then she walked toward the cannon. No one had told her to act. No one had authorized anything. But when the second hostile fighter passed low on the port side and dropped flares, the sound that followed wasn't just a sonic boom. It was the sound of training unraveling into fear. Will her actions save them or doom her? One of the deck hands fumbled a radio. Another shouted for the combat systems officer. But Wyatt, she didn't shout. She moved. Her boots echoed across the steel as she stepped past the deck personnel frozen in place. The anti-aircraft cannon locked in standby mode sat silent as alarms flared red above it. A moment of static on the intercom, then silence. No engagement order, no command of fire, just protocol paralysis as leadership scrambled inside CIC, waiting on confirmations that wouldn't come fast enough. She reached the turret without resistance. Not a soul stopped her. Most still thought she was just a mechanic who hadn't been briefed to stay below deck. But when her hand touched the override panel on the cannon's control harness and punched in a 6-digit access code, no one else on the Valor should have known. The system came alive with a mechanical groan and an electric hum. The barrels rotated. The radar lock kicked in. The firing arc recalibrated manually, and she adjusted it by hand. Fluid, efficient, calm. Master Chief Holbrook emerged from the bridge access stairwell just in time to see her seated behind the turret's console. His voice cracked through the wind. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're—" He didn't finish the sentence because at that exact moment, a third hostile jet broke formation in a low sweep, closing fast on the destroyer's aft section. The CIWS still hadn't powered. Command hadn't cleared a shot. And Wyatt didn't wait. Her hand closed over the joystick. Her thumb tapped the firing trigger with mechanical precision. The deck shook. Tracer rounds erupted in a stream of thunder, streaking into the sky like molten wire. The minigun turret roared alive, deafening, and brutal. Her expression didn't change. Her eyes stayed locked ahead, cold, calculating, locked on the trajectory as the first jet took a direct burst under the left wing. Explosion. A bright orange detonation midair. Metal folding inward like paper ignited. Crew dropped to their knees. The second aircraft banked hard. Too late. She rotated the cannon, adjusted 2 degrees, and fired again. 6 seconds total. 2 jets down. Silence. The smell of burnt fuel and cordite hung heavy in the air. Sparks rained from the mount's cooling vents. And still she sat motionless. Finger lifted off the trigger, watching the radar sweep for more. Behind her, Master Chief Holbrook couldn't speak. The deck hands didn't move. Someone muttered something over the radio, a confused half-sentence. Target down. Who the hell just fired? Inside CIC, chaos turned to confusion. Then came the voice. Calm, aged, deliberate. Admiral Rowe. Who's operating the aft battery? A long pause followed. Then a junior officer stammered, "Sir, we don't know. She's not on the weapons roster." Rose said nothing for several seconds. Then very softly, "Describe her." The answer took a while. Then female, civilian coveralls, black gear harness, looks about 35 to 40, tanned, dark hair. The Admiral cut him off. "That's not a civilian." Another pause. "Sir." The Admiral's voice was colder now. "That's Echo 7. Codename Iron Reaper." The sky fractured in a violent peal of thunder as the carrier deck trembled beneath her boots. Sirens screamed. Radios cracked into chaos. Across the steel-plated deck, sailors scrambled in all directions, colliding with crates, toppling over barriers, shouting conflicting orders no one could process. Above the din, the air defense operator's voice echoed through the speakers. "Bogies inbound. Multiple vectors, 30 seconds to impact." No one noticed her at first. She had been dismissed after all. A woman with no stripes, no clearance, no voice. She had watched silently from the railing just outside the cordon zone, where the sea sprayed cold against her face, and tension clung to her skin like salt. But her eyes never left the sky. Not once. Then the first shadow broke from the clouds. A low, aggressive rumble. Too fast, too low, and unmistakable. Twin MiGs dropped from formation in a steep dive, skimming the waves, their engines howling like wolves at a kill. They came in hard, side by side, war paint glinting under the stormlight, weapons armed. The automated defenses were offline. No time, no link, no override. Crew shouted for the CIWS to spin up, but the turret stood inert, frozen like a monument in the rising panic. And that's when she moved. No one saw where she came from, just that she was suddenly on the deck, vaulting a safety barrier like it wasn't there, weaving through fleeing crew toward the anti-air cannon station. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to touch it, but she did without hesitation. A young weapons tech, a junior petty officer barely old enough to shave, tried to block her, hand outstretched. "Ma'am, you can't." She didn't even slow. "Move." Something in her voice, low, absolute, cut through the din like a razor. He froze. She reached the console and slammed both hands down on the manual override. The screen blinked red. No authentication. Access denied. She tore the panel open with practiced precision, revealing the mechanical switch beneath, a failsafe buried for emergencies no one ever expected to use. She didn't hesitate, not even for a breath. The turret roared to life. Its twin barrels spun up with a mechanical growl that vibrated through the deck. Smoke burst from its sides as she swung the joystick and brought the MiGs into her sights. A heartbeat. Another. She didn't blink. The first jet banked hard, too late. The cannon screamed. A wall of tracers erupted into the sky. A stream of red-hot fury that stitched through the clouds and tore into the first MiG's fuselage. Flames erupted midair, wings shearing off in a spiral of smoke and fire. Debris scattered across the ocean as the cockpit tore open and vanished. The second MiG pulled away. Wrong move. She adjusted by instinct. A breath, a shift of her wrist. The second burst of fire hit the tail, then the wing root. The jet tried to roll but lost lift. Trailing black smoke and a corkscrew fall toward the sea. It didn't explode. It folded. 6 seconds, 2 kills, 1 silence. No one moved. The cannon hissed, barrels smoking. The storm cracked again in the distance, but the deck remained frozen. No one dared speak. Not the commander on the bridge. Not the tech she had pushed aside. Not the crew who had laughed when she arrived that morning without rank or clearance, tucked behind a clipboard and a story no one had bothered to ask. She stood at the console, hands still on the joystick, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of someone who had just remembered how to breathe. And then the deck chief arrived. He came sprinting from the bridge tower, eyes wild, voice caught between fury and disbelief. Who the hell authorized? He stopped cold. He had seen her face before, weeks ago, maybe months, when she'd signed on for logistics observation. Her jacket bore no insignia. Her paperwork was blank beyond clearance level 4. He had barely looked twice. Now she stood behind a hot cannon, smoke still curling around her, backlit by the glow of 2 burning aircraft over the ocean. And for the first time, he really looked at her. There was something under the collar of her soaked tactical shirt. A faint line. A barely visible ink mark at the base of her neck. A tattoo. Simple, brutal, unmistakable. If you knew what it meant. The chief's voice dropped. That's not possible. She turned slowly. No pride. No swagger. Just control. Quiet and absolute. The way a woman walks when she knows exactly what she's capable of. The way someone moves when they've done this before too many times to count. I need the east turret online, she said calmly. They're coming back. The chief blinked. Who are you? She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped off the platform, looked past the stunned faces, and pointed to the radar screen behind him. 3 more blips. Fast. Incoming. All stations, barked a voice over comms, finally recovering. All stations, prepare for wave 2. But the deck wasn't listening. They were still watching her. The storm had shifted. The battle had started. The destroyer was alive again. But it was her voice the crew turned to now. Her presence that steadied their feet. Her decisions that carried weight. And somewhere inside CIC, a rear admiral replayed the kill footage on loop, his eyes narrowing as he leaned closer to the screen, rewinding, zooming in, and whispering 2 words under his breath. Shadow Vector. The silence that fell over the destroyer's deck was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of disbelief. The kind that hangs in the air, thick and unmoving, long after the last echoes of gunfire have died. After the roar of engines fades into memory, and all that's left is the stunned weight of what just happened. Smoke drifted across the surface of the sea, curling upward from the burning wreckage of the two enemy fighters now sinking into the ocean's depths. The same ocean whose waves still slapped relentlessly against the hull. And she stood there still gripping the control arms of the minigun, her stance unwavering, the sleeves of her soaked combat suit dark with sweat, salt, and the recoil grime of the cannon she wasn't supposed to touch. She hadn't moved. She hadn't said a word. Not when the second jet dropped in flames. Not when the entire deck crew froze behind her. Not when the ship's alarms fell silent, cut by command from the bridge. And not now, as silence tightened around her like a noose made of collective guilt, awe, and fear. They hadn't known. Not the junior weapons officer who barked orders as if she were a tech. Not the gunnery chief who'd waved her off the deck that morning like she was in the way. Not the XO who'd signed the forms to restrict her to internal systems review for the duration of the exercise. No one on that deck had known what she'd done before this uniform, before she traded shadows for structure. And when she stepped forward to the gun, alone while sirens screamed and others dove for cover, she hadn't looked back once. Now they did. The deck crew stared at her with something beyond confusion. It wasn't just shock. It was the slow crumbling of their own assumptions of the way they had seen her. A specialist, a background name, a civilian recalled support advisor wearing borrowed rank, no insignia on her sleeves, no record of combat tours, no ribbons, no patchwork of honors. But she'd just done something no one else on that ship had managed. She'd crossed the yellow line, climbed to the starboard gun, calibrated an old analog sighting system manually while two bogies screamed overhead and fired a precision burst that brought both jets down. 6 seconds, 2 kills, and she hadn't blinked. No one told her to stand down now. No one said a word as she disengaged the safety and stepped away from the console. Her breathing was calm, measured, the weapon still steamed behind her, muzzle cooling from rapid fire heat, its rotation arms twitching with residual recoil. The brass casings lay scattered across the deck like glittering confessions. Far above, the bridge doors hissed open, footsteps echoed before the man appeared. Every pair of eyes turned upward. The admiral descended slowly. No cap, no escort, just the weight of command behind each step. He didn't shout for a report. He didn't ask who had fired unauthorized. He didn't demand an explanation. He walked the length of the deck, passing crews still frozen in position. He passed the XO without a glance, past the gunnery chief, who had paled and dropped his headset. He passed the Marines who had just minutes earlier taken defensive positions and now stood as if the wind had been punched out of them. His boots clanked against the metal stairs as he reached the gun platform. She hadn't turned. He stopped 5 foot behind her and for a full 10 seconds, 10 long seconds, he said nothing. Then, with a quiet exhale, heard only by those closest to the center of the blast radius, he raised his hand, not to reprimand, not to point, but to salute. She turned then, her hair clung to her temples in wet strands, her face streaked with sweat and sea spray, eyes unblinking, wide with readiness, but calm in the aftermath. And still she didn't speak. She simply returned the salute. That was when the others moved. The deck crew stiffened. A few took uncertain steps forward. The gunnery chief stepped back as if trying to disappear. The XO turned to face the admiral, readying a protest, but the admiral raised a single hand without looking. She was Shadow 12, he said quietly. Enough for the wind to carry. SEAL forward fire team. 9 successful XFIL missions under zero visibility contact. 2 Black Viper linked joint operations. No one else aboard this carrier has those clearances, not even me. The silence deepened. Shadow 12. For years, just a code name whispered in briefings that never made it to the general rosters. She had no official kill count, no medal archive. Her records had been locked under layers of black operations. The fact she was even allowed to consult on carrier engineering was a compromise. A way to keep her present but hidden. Skills intact but unused until the world broke open. and the line between operators and observers vanished in smoke. Someone exhaled too loudly. A tech dropped their helmet. On the far end of the deck, a young radar operator fell to his knees in disbelief. And somewhere in the silence, someone whispered, "She shouldn't have been here." The admiral turned slowly, his eyes were sharp, his voice low, but unflinching. She was exactly where she needed to be. And with that, he stepped aside, letting her walk past him without further command. Her boots echoed as she descended the platform, past the gunnery crew who parted instinctively, past the officers who had once sidelined her, past the teams who no longer saw a background figure, but a ghost from the real war. No one stopped her. They watched. They remembered. She crossed the deck, paused at the edge, turned once more toward the sky, now quiet, now strangely bright in the wake of battle. And then she removed her gloves, placed them on the rail, and walked inside. Only then did the ship exhale. Only then did the first voice crack through the haze. "Where the hell did we get her from?" But the admiral didn't answer. He remained on the platform, one hand still half raised from the salute. And for the first time since the entire incident began, he smiled. This just barely because he knew. They hadn't got her. She'd been there all along. And they'd just been lucky enough to see what she could do. She didn't go to the ceremony. She didn't need the speech, the folded flag, the dry words of commendation from officers who'd once seen her as a technician with clearance, not a combat asset. She'd watched the footage play over and over again from the server logs. Watched the 6 seconds that changed everything. No angles could distort it. No edits could dull the precision. The deck camera caught it all. The shift in her posture, the timing of the rounds, the clean descent of 2 fast-moving fighters torn from the sky by someone they hadn't even logged in the roster. The footage leaked, of course. They tried to contain it, flagged it as classified, but someone always sees. Within 48 hours, the forums whispered her name. Not the one on her badge. The other one. The one buried behind digital black ink and encryption. Shadow 12. And suddenly the ship had to answer questions. How had a civilian contractor taken control of a live naval gun system during active engagement? Why had no active duty gunnery officer reacted fast enough? How did she have the training to make the shots? They didn't want to answer. But the silence only raised the volume of the questions until the admiral, calm, immovable, already facing quiet pressure from those above, released a single statement. 6 seconds of action do not require a full service record to justify them. But if you must know, she was one of ours. The kind you don't list on rolls, the kind who never expected to be seen. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. And that was when the ship began to shift. Not in its systems or structure, but in its memory. The crew began replaying every interaction they had had with her, every dismissed suggestion, every silent nod, every time she showed up 5 minutes early for a systems check, and asked questions that only engineers who'd lived through sabotage knew to ask. She never told them her past. She never corrected their assumptions. And they never thought to ask until now. Now, every glance carried weight. Some were guilt, some were awe, some were fear disguised as respect. But none of them met her the same way they had before. The gunnery chief tried to approach her once in the corridor, said he hadn't known. She said nothing in reply, just nodded once, and kept walking. The XO left a note outside her temporary quarters. He never said what was in it. She never opened it. Even the junior techs who once joked about her soft assignment now walked past her in stiff silence, unsure whether to salute, to apologize, or just to vanish. She made it easy for them. She was gone by the 3rd morning. No goodbyes, no request for extraction, no signature on the rotation schedule. She simply wasn't there when they checked the logistics manifest. The only trace, a folded piece of notebook paper left in the maintenance log with just one sentence handwritten in ink. When the mission's done, the shadows don't linger. No name, no rank. But it was enough. Back home, if she could call it that, she found no headlines waiting, no medals, no interviews. She didn't expect them. She didn't want them. The mission wasn't to be seen. The mission was to finish. And she had, but others had seen. And that changed everything. Weeks later, she was in a hangar, quiet, forgotten, tucked behind a row of decommissioned gear no one touched. She liked it there, the sound of metal and dust, of silence between storms. That's when she heard the approach, not footsteps, a presence, and then the voice. Low, familiar, careful not to startle. I had to fight through 3 departments to find your location. She turned. The Admiral stood just inside the doorway. No entourage, just the same quiet power that had once watched her fire without command. You shouldn't be here, she said. Neither should you have been on that deck, he replied. But I'm glad you were. She didn't answer. He stepped closer. You made some people uncomfortable. She gave a faint half-smile. That's never been new. But you made others think, rethink, remember. He exhaled. We forget sometimes that legends don't wear ribbons. They walk beside us unnoticed. She tilted her head. And some of them deserve to be asked if they're willing to come back. A silence stretched between them. I don't need a rank, she said finally. You wouldn't be given one, he replied. You'd be given the choice to operate under it or above it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Black Viper. He nodded. You'd be the anchor this time. You wouldn't go in guns up. You'd teach, shape. Create the ones who will walk through shadows next. She looked away. The sound of distant seagulls and hangar wind curled around them like ghosts. It's been a long time, she said. I know. She turned back to him. And they'll still call me just support. He smiled. Until you aren't. Silence again and then. I'll think about it, she said. He didn't push. He saluted, not formally, just enough and left her alone again. But she didn't return to the shadows. Not fully. 2 months later, a small training facility in the Northwest was quietly renamed. It didn't make headlines. It didn't need to. But among a select few, a code name began to circulate again. Not as a ghost, but as a living force. Shadow 12. Not a number, a signal that somewhere out there she was still watching, still waiting, still ready when the next 6 seconds came. At Graceful Valor Stories, we believe that some stories aren't just worth telling. They're worth remembering. If this story moved you, honor it by hitting that like button. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories to make sure these voices, the quiet heroes, the forgotten names are never lost to time. And tell us in the comments, where were you when you realized what real courage looks like?